My wife and my son are in Kentucky today.
Hello from Oregon. Atlanta stands with Rand. So does New Jersey. Don't tell Chris Christie that.
Always have fond memories of Atlanta. That's where I met my wife, and that's where I did a year of general surgery down there.
Hello from Orlando. We've got someone from New York. Not too far away.
All right, I think we're going to get started. Thanks everybody for joining. We are in the Big Apple tonight. We are at Twitter headquarters and we're doing a Twitter town hall, and we are excited that you've decided to join us. We've had a really busy week with ups and downs, but I'm kind of a guy that believes in the glass being half full. So we took sort of a rotten, dirty deal that they dealt us and not letting us be in the debate, and we said, you know what, let's turn it into a positive. So we came to New York City and we said we want to spread our message. We deserve for the liberty message to be heard. The message of less intervention overseas, the message of less intervention in your lives, the message of being fiscally conservative and letting the economy grow. All of that message deserves to be heard, and we have been heard. Interestingly, in the last 2 days, over 15 million people have viewed my attempts to spread the liberty message on either TV or on the radio. We've also had nearly 25 million interactions on social media. So we think we are getting the message out, but the only way we win against great odds is if the internet lights up, if young people actually show up and vote. We probably are more organized on college campuses than any other candidate. We've organized all 20 college campuses in Iowa. Our goal is to get 10,000 students to come out and vote. But a lot of people don't believe it. Now, the people who don't believe it often have gray hair and they're a little older and they think young people won't vote. But we frankly think that young people will get out and vote, and that young people want to be left alone. I've been one of the loudest voices in Washington saying, you know what, the government has no right to have your records of your activities on your cell phone. The government has no right to collect your credit card statements. Frankly, the government, unless they have suspicion or a judge's order or a warrant, has no right really to invade your privacy. And I think that voice is an important one. It's a voice that won't be on the debate stage tonight, and that's too bad. But the great thing about modern media is if you don't like what's on TV, turn the TV off. Turn your computer on, find the news, find the people you agree with, find the people that you want to listen to, the people who represent your point of view. Not only am I probably the leading voice in the country on privacy, I've also been, I think, a voice for a saner, more rational foreign policy. You have people on the stage who will tell you tonight they want to make the sand glow. They want to carpet bomb the Middle East. The only problem with that kind of strategy, or the main problem with that kind of strategy is, you know what, you may well end up creating more terrorists than you can kill. We have people on the stage who have no earthly idea what the nuclear triad is and have no earthly idea what we should do or shouldn't do with our nuclear weapons. I'm talking about you, Donald. You're not there. I'm sure you'll tweet back at me when you get done with other things. But here's the thing. Donald has no earthly idea what our nuclear arsenal is, and yet his spokesman came out a week after the last debate. You know what he said? He said that the main problem we have is that we haven't been willing enough to use our nuclear arsenal. Well, frankly, I think that's scary and ought to disqualify him from the debate stage for being someone too naive to really be put in a position of authority. Chris Christie, don't get me started. My goodness, I put forward the proposition that a no-fly zone was dangerous because it might lead to a confrontation with Russia. Sure enough, he took the bait, but instead of backing away from some horrendous idea of getting into a confrontation, he assured all of America that he would shoot down Russian planes and that he was eager for a confrontation with Russia. This is the voice that's missing on the stage tonight. It's a voice that says, you know what, we should obey the Constitution. We should not go to war unless Congress initiates war. We should obey the Constitution and the Fourth Amendment, leave people alone. We should also say, and this is an important thing to say, and I don't think it's fully come out in any of the debates, that the war on drugs has failed. That what has happened through the war on drugs is civil liberties have been invaded, and also a disproportionate amount of our poor, primarily African Americans and Hispanics, have been caught up in this war on drug and incarcerated in our prisons. And when you wonder why so many people are unhappy in our cities, listen to what the complaints are, and realize that if you look at drug use, you look at marijuana use, white kids and black kids are using drugs at about the same rate, but our prisons are 3 out of 4 in prison are black or brown. So we need to realize that we have gone way too far in the war on drugs. So I'm the candidate that will not put your kids in jail for marijuana, won't send them to war in the Middle East, and won't be collecting people's phone records across America. If that's the kind of candidate that you're interested in, turn your TV off, turn your computer on, get online for us, make phone calls for us in Iowa, make phone calls for us in New Hampshire, go to randpaul.com and sign up to help us. Right now what we're going to do is we're going to start taking your questions on Twitter, and I think we're going to limit it to 10,000 questions, so start getting your questions in as soon as possible. Thanks. Whether or not Donald Trump would be a good president, they ought to call up Vera Coakley, who lived in her house for 30 years, and then Donald Trump said, you know what, I want your house, and I'm going to get the government to go over and take it from you so I can build a parking lot for one of my casinos. I think most conservatives, if they knew Donald Trump was for using eminent domain to take private property from one property owner to give it to another private property owner, I think they'd be horrified. I'm still waiting for the day when everybody wakes up and says, oh my goodness, Donald Trump, I can't believe I ever thought of supporting that guy.
Good. All right. We're going to get another one from Twitter here. Our question is, Rand Paul, did you think you'd be the most talked about candidate after getting unlawfully booted from the main debate?
Well, it's kind of funny. U.S. News has a poll out there right now, and if people want to go to the poll, they can vote for other people that were in the undercard, or you can vote for me by saying that I made the best decision by skipping the undercard debate. I actually think we made a good decision not doing it, mainly because we have a first-tier campaign. You know, we've got, I think, a campaign that rivals organizationally any of the campaigns out there. In fact, I think we exceed them in Iowa with 1,000 precinct captains. Last time I was in Iowa, hundreds of young students working in our headquarters making phone calls. We think we've got a real shot. We're just going to have a little more difficult course because we have to go around some of the media and some of the party elites that are blocking us.
I have a question that's a Kentucky-based question, actually, that we'll ask you right now. And that is, we all know that bourbon is the most American drink. Tell us the best Kentucky bourbons.
Now, there's a really hard question. And, you know, that's liable to get me in trouble. And the only time I'm ever a really good politician and take the safe way out is when I say, you know what, I like all the Kentucky bourbons and can't really make a choice for just one. Did that sound a little bit like Carly Fiorina and her football choice? Sorry.
Question from Periscope. They'd like to know, what is your plan with states and their right to legalize marijuana?
You know, I think states ought to be left alone to make their own decisions, and I don't think the federal government should come in like a bully and decide to take over. Oh, speaking of bullies, I was just thinking about Chris Christie because, you know, that's his plan. He would send the federal police into Colorado and start arresting everybody. Wonder how many federal police you would have to send to Colorado to arrest everybody. And who in their right mind would vote for a bully from New Jersey that's going to send the police to Colorado?
We have a Twitter question. Is going to be, what is the difference in your foreign policy?
Well, you know, the difference in my foreign policy compared to the rest is I think they're just competing to see who can be for blowing up the Middle East more than the rest, you know. Some want to blow it up 10 times over, some other people want to blow it up 20 times over. And I think we have to have a foreign policy that's more realistic. foreign policy that recognizes the world as it is, but a foreign policy that says, the number one priority is to defend our country. I believe, as Reagan did in Peace Through Strength, I think we should do whatever it takes to keep us safe. But I think that we have to rethink the foreign policy that involved intervention and toppling foreign leaders and saying that we could figure out who is the best foreign leader. So far, I like this better than the formal debate, I think.
Well, first of all, you get to answer all the questions, right? You don't have to wait for a whole bunch of other people to answer them. So,
Tasty Treasures on Periscope is asking, what is your plan for the Fed, and will you abolish it?
Well, I tried very hard this week to audit the Fed, and I wish my buddy Ted Cruz would have showed up to help me, because we were pretty close to doing it, but we were a couple of votes short, and one of the votes we were missing was Ted Cruz, who didn't have time to come to vote on the issue. But audit the Fed is something I've been working on for about 5 years now. I finally got a vote on auditing the Fed, and we had 53 votes for and I think 44 votes against. So we actually had a significant vote. We got a majority of people saying that we need to audit the Fed. I think the Fed has been part of income inequality in our country. And the reason I say that is that the Fed creates the money, but as they do, the money goes first to very wealthy bankers in New York. It trickles out into the economy, but by the time the new money reaches the middle class, the prices have already been bid up and inflation saps their wages, and the regular folks don't get much advantage to it. The other thing that the Fed's been doing lately that I object to is they're paying interest, a significant amount of interest, billions of dollars of interest to large commercial banks, but the regular middle class and working class, if you go to put your money in a bank, it's almost no interest. In fact, sometimes you have to pay a bank to even keep your money anymore. So I'm for shedding some light, shedding some sunshine on the Fed, and that's where I'd start. But I also think interest rates ought to be dictated and controlled by the marketplace, not by one single government entity.
you mentioned in the audit the Fed vote about somebody not showing up to vote. We have a Twitter question that says, Rand, you show up to vote much more than the other candidates. Why is this so important?
Well, the taxpayer pays me to be a U.S. Senator, and I think you ought to show up. In the last couple of months, Marco Rubio's missed over half of his votes. And I've frankly said that he either ought to turn his check back in or maybe he ought to consider resigning, because he's spending all his time out on the campaign trail. I work during the week, do my job in the Senate, and then I've been traveling on weekends. It's hard to do all that and stay and be there in Washington for my job, but I think it's important.
Question from Periscope, how are you doing in Iowa and New Hampshire?
I think we have maybe the strongest organization in both Iowa and New Hampshire. We have in Iowa 3 former state party chairmen running the effort. We have hundreds of young people involved, and really our goal is to get 10,000 college students to vote. I've traveled to virtually every college campus in Iowa. I'll be back there this weekend. We'll be hosting college rallies and trying to get the young people out to vote. We think we have a great shot. Winning the caucus in Iowa isn't about really national polls. What it is, it's about organizational ability and getting your vote out.
All right, we're going to get another question from Twitter here, and it's on the topic of defense spending and wasteful defense spending. The question is, what Pentagon program do you think is the most wasteful, and how will you prevent waste from occurring in the Pentagon?
Well, the worst project is not the largest, but the worst Defense Department project I've heard of recently was the $43 million they spent in Afghanistan on a natural gas station. This makes absolutely no sense. Very few people have cars in Afghanistan, much less a car that runs on natural gas. But it's just another example of people in the government who have decided they're going to turn the planet green by making natural gas stations in Afghanistan. It's really not any of our business to be building gas stations. We don't have the money to do it. In fact, we've got to borrow the money from China to spend it in Afghanistan. This gas station cost 86 times more than it should have cost. But there's waste like that that runs throughout government. Last year, I objected to the militarization of our local police forces. Many of our little small towns are driving around 20-ton mine-resistant ambush vehicles, which have no use really in modern cities. We give out 12,000 bayonets to our cities, ridiculous things like that. But the one thing that really boggled my mind, they say it's surplus military equipment. A third of the surplus equipment was brand new. So I'm asking myself, are we building it for the military? They're not using it ever, and then we're passing it along as surplus to the police, and then you get this revolving door, so someone's just making a fortune. There is waste in the Pentagon. If you are fiscally conservative, you have to be for cutting it. This is what separates me from the entire field. There's not one other candidate on there who would audit the Pentagon and also say that there is waste in military spending, and I'll cut it.
Here's a question from Periscope from Eric. What are your thoughts on making all states right to work?
You know, I've always been a fan of Right to Work. In fact, I've been the national spokesman for Right to Work over the last couple of years, and I'm proud of that work. I know about this firsthand because the state I live in, Kentucky, we're surrounded by states that are right to work now. We lose jobs and businesses to them on a daily basis. So I think workers ought to have the right to decide whether they want to be in a union or not. They shouldn't be forced into it. Supreme Court's looking at forced union dues right now, and I'm hoping the Supreme Court will rule against forcing people to pay union dues. But the bottom line is, if we want to be competitive, we have to allow non-union shops to set up, because otherwise we're going to keep losing business and jobs overseas.
All right, next question is from Twitter. How would you keep our nation and our border problem?
You know, I think national defense starts with border security. We have to know who's coming into our country, either to visit or as students. If you look back to 9/11, the people who came here to attack us on 9/11, they actually came here through regular immigrant visas. And I wish it weren't so, but we live in a dangerous world, and there are a considerable amount of people around the world who would come here to attack us. So I think if people want to come and visit or come to study, there's going to have to be more scrutiny, more of a background check before they come into this country.
Cecil Hollinghead wants to know, where do you stand on term limits for Congress and Senate?
I'm a big fan of term limits. In fact, it was one of the first bills that I introduced when I got to Washington. I think that people get to Washington, stay too long, and then I think more turnover in office would help fresh ideas and fresh blood to get to Washington. One of the biggest problems in Washington is inertia, the status quo, and then people say it's always been that way, and so it always stays that way. But one of the things that we're stuck with the status quo is a government that's so big that we pile on $1 million a minute in new debt, and so I think term limits would help us.
Okay, we have another question from Twitter. That is, do you think that the party has analyzed the potential of losing votes from the libertarian wing of the party if Donald Trump is nominated?
Well, I think it's a twofold problem the Republican Party has right now. One, if Donald Trump is nominated, they could lose a lot of libertarian or liberty-loving Republicans. But also, if they keep trying to exclude me from the debates, that's not helping them, you know, with trying to keep the liberty voters in the party. So I think there's a lot of reasons why the Republican Party, we need to be a more diverse party ethnically, but we also need to be a more diverse party as far as ideologically, including liberty voters and making us feel welcome in the party.
What are your plans for the upcoming week, and how can people get involved?
I was thinking about going on vacation. I've been working pretty hard, but I think nobody's going to let me do that. I think it's work all the way up until Iowa, and we're going to be working hard. I'll be in New Hampshire tomorrow for 2 days. If you go to randpaul.com, you can find out our schedule for our events that will all be public in New Hampshire. And then the next 2 days, I think Sunday and Monday, will be in Iowa. And then Tuesday, I'll be back doing my day job, which is voting in the U.S. Senate.
We addressed this a little bit up front, but let's do it again for people that are joining us as we go along. Why would I watch the GOP debate? The Rand rally is where it's at. What do you have to say about that?
Absolutely don't watch the debate. Turn it off. You won't get anything new. Turn your TV off. Tune into the computer. And check out the only candidate around who'll answer all your questions. I think people will find that they're going to get the same old from those candidates. You know, we borrow $1 million a minute, And everyone up there on the stage is saying, oh, we need to spend, what's Rubio saying? He wants to spend $1 trillion in new military spending. Where's he going to get it? He's going to have to borrow it from Russia, borrow it from China, borrow it from all these countries that we've become indebted to. So I think that it's time that we had something different. Tonight we're getting a town hall, unscripted, all the questions you can ask.
All right. Someone says, let's talk about the economy. So let's talk about the economy.
One of the biggest problems I think we have is that we're making it a inhospitable place to do business in America. Our taxes are too high and our regulatory burden's too high. But as a consequence, in a global economy, people just move away. So last year, Burger King reincorporated in Canada. Why? Canada's taxes are half of ours. Our corporate income tax is the largest in the world, 35%. Canada, 15%. Pfizer, great American company that has created thousands and thousands of jobs and created billions of dollars of profits for Americans, created life-saving drugs. They're wanting to merge with the company in Ireland, primarily because the taxes are a lot lower in Ireland. So if we want the economy to be better in our country, want to keep jobs here, we have to make it a good place to do business, which means lowering taxes, and it means getting rid of the regulatory burden. I've offered to get rid of the entire tax code, scrap the whole thing, all 70,000 pages, and I would replace it with a tax code you can fill out on a postcard. 14.5% for businesses, 14.5% for individuals. The Tax Foundation, an independent group, has looked at it, said it will create millions of jobs, and it'll create an enormous amount of growth in our economy.
All right, we've got another question from Twitter. This one is a question that certainly will only be answered one way by you and by nobody else on that stage, on that other thing they're doing tonight, which is, how will you mend the damage done by the war on drugs?
I think the first thing we have to do is admit that it's a failure. I think we have to acknowledge that the war on drugs has actually had a disproportionate effect on minorities. And I think that there still are problems with drugs, obviously. I think addiction is a problem in our country. But I think we need to treat it as a health problem, not as an incarceration problem. I think a lot of the money that we would save from putting people in prison, some of that could actually be used for rehabilitation and helping people to get off of drugs. But I think it's been a mistake to lock everybody up, and so I'm for sentencing reform, you name it, criminal justice. I'm in favor of trying to fix the system.
Drew on Periscope would like to know, what will you do for religious liberty?
I think it's important, the First Amendment, that government not get involved in your business, the government leave you alone, to let you practice not only your business but your religion as you see fit. I think one of the biggest dangers to religious liberty that's coming is that many people look at a tax deduction and they say, oh, that's the government's money. If you acknowledge, or if you somehow believe or accept the notion that if you get a tax deduction or a tax credit that's the government's money, then the government can control that money, that's the first step towards controlling churches, because they'll say your donation is tax deductible, therefore that we're going to control it because it's the government's money. I don't believe that for a minute, and I think that's something we have to guard against, because I think it's your money, and if you choose to give your money to your church, in no way should that allow the government to be involved with dictating what you can do or say in your church.
All right, we've got another Twitter question here, and this one is, please tell us what the Constitution means to you, and how would you make it stronger when you become president?
One of the most important things I think about the Constitution was that it separated the powers. So we're supposed to have co-equal branches of government, Congress, the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judiciary. And they wanted to keep power from accumulating in one branch too much, so they kind of tried to separate the powers. In fact, Madison said that we would pit ambition against ambition. The ambition of Congress to gain more power would be pitted against the president, who would want to gain more power, and they would check and balance each other. One of the worst things that President Obama's done to the country is he actually has collapsed the separation of powers. The equilibrium has been lost, and the executive branch has grown so large that we're very concerned now that we could actually get to a point where we live more in a government by executive fiat, which is more like a monarchy, and that worries a lot of us. So what I would do with the Constitution is we would obey the Constitution. If you did, you'd have a government with very few functions. It would balance its budget, and it would largely leave people alone. I think we're going to do one or two more, and then we're going to take a break.
Do you feel political correctness has gone too far?
Yes. Trying to get shorter answers. You guys are aware.
Give us your thoughts on Marco Rubio.
Yes. No, I think the thing is, what mostly concerns me about Marco Rubio is that he's fallen into the trap of the neoconservatives who believe that we should remake the world in our image, that we should send our armies around the world to conquer people and to build nations. I thoroughly believe he would bankrupt the country through foolish foreign adventures, but I also think that he would have us involved in war in the Middle East. Cato did something recently where they looked at the candidates most likely to involve us in another Middle Eastern war. Interestingly, Hillary Clinton was number one, but number two is Marco Rubio. And I've told people there are two sides of the same coin, that actually Hillary Clinton is a neoconservative and that the Democrats need to admit they've got one on their side also.
Who would you appoint to the Supreme Court?
You know, I'd appoint people who believe in the original interpretation of the Constitution, that believe in the original text of the Constitution, and that don't believe that they can create or write new laws, and also believe that the Constitution, Supreme Court is there to strike down laws that are unconstitutional, and that the Supreme Court can be part of preventing government from growing too large by striking down legislation that basically is not justified by the Constitution.
Before we take a break, we're actually just going to go for another minute or two for you, because that debate that probably no one is watching is actually on a commercial break right now. So the most people are probably going to, in case anybody wanted to see that and they came over to see this, we want to give them some more content. So what do you think that people that may just be tuning in missed from hearing from you over the last 40 minutes or so? And what do you think is the main thing that you want to get across to Republican voters tonight?
Well, I think if you're watching the debate, you probably haven't been hearing anybody who's a fiscal conservative in the debate. If they're talking about spending more, bombing more, if they're talking about trying to get us back involved in the Middle East, they're not really conservative, because those things are extraordinarily expensive. In the first Iraq War, which I opposed, we spent $1 trillion. We lost 5,000 brave young men and women, Americans. And how did Iraq repay us? They basically spit on us. They said, oh, you know what? Our ally's now going to be Iran. Iran is stronger. Who's your second best ally? Russia. So I think it hasn't worked, and we have to be very wary of how expensive the notion of nation building is as we move forward. And I don't think you're going to hear any of that on the stage. You're going to hear people who want to make the sand glow, people who want to carpet bomb the Middle East, and you'll hear what Chris Christie, the guy, the World War III candidate, is going to be there probably saying who he's going to shoot down, which planes he's going to shoot down. But what you won't hear on the stage with me missing is someone who believes in a common sense, strong national defense, peace through strength, but who believes that war is the last resort, not the first.
And last question before we take a quick break. Last question is, were you watching the undercard debate? And whether or not you were, who won?
Well, I only had a small window of time, so I was exercising and I didn't get to watch the debate. But I think that probably if you look at the U.S. News and World Report website, you'll find that by my not showing up, that many people thought I made the right decision and won by not showing up. So I think we're going to take a little break. My voice is getting a little raspy, and we'll be back in just a couple minutes. Law through executive order. I think that's wrong, and in fact not what our founding fathers intended. So many things were specifically delegated, to Congress. Article 1, Section 8 gives specific powers to Congress, and that's basically all they're supposed to do. What's happened, though, over time is specific powers like initiating war. That is a congressional power. We've somehow allowed that to gravitate to where even now both Republicans and Democrats say, oh, he can do whatever he wants. In fact, Republicans recently said, we're not going to pass any authorization for any kind of war in the Middle East because we're afraid it might limit the next president. Well, precisely, that's what you're supposed to do, is limit the president, limit their authority. We don't have a king. We don't have a president with unlimited powers. And so this is a big problem. If I were president, I'd be the first president in a generation who would actually say, you know what, we're going to send the power back to the states and back to the people.
Here's a question from Periscope. What is your message to supporters of Bernie Sanders?
You know, Bernie Sanders talks a lot about some of the abuses that big banks have had and abuses of this and that. He did vote with me on Audit the Fed, but our differences are much greater than our similarities. I believe very firmly that the system of capitalism created great wealth in our country and creates great wealth from top to bottom. It's why even those who live in poverty, which I don't discount, but even those who live in poverty in our country are much richer than most countries around the planet. So his belief in socialism, I think, is naive, because I think those who believe you can get something for free or something for nothing, they just aren't looking hard enough to see that somebody actually has to pay for it. Somebody will pay for your free college education. It's not really free. And even the people you're trying to help, those who are poor, if you simply print up and create new money to pay for the things that they want, you end up devaluing the dollar, their prices go up, and when they go to the grocery store, it's why sort of the problem of poverty never seems to go away with big government programs. The only thing that lifts people out of poverty are productivity increases and capitalism, but government never really helps.
Another question from Periscope. Why did Senator Cruz skip Audit the Fed vote?
I don't know. I was disappointed that he wasn't there for that. I mean, he's paid by the taxpayer. It's a big issue. It's a big issue to Liberty voters to say, you know what, we've been trying for 5 years to get Audit the Fed. This is simply an oversight bill. It's a transparency bill, and we could have used his help. We wish he would have taken the time to show up for the vote.
Next question is from Twitter. It's actually more of a comment that you can maybe expand on. This live stream has more substance than any Republican debate in the last decade. Care to comment?
Well, I couldn't agree more. And, you know, while we are annoyed that they excluded us from the debate, we feel like there is every justification in the polls that we should have been in the debate. The great thing about the internet, a great thing about doing a Twitter town hall, is you can't be banned from the internet. The internet is a free place for people to connect and collect, and you can express your opinions and your ideas out there. Anybody can, and it, to me, is a great equalizing force, that no longer do the networks control the debate, no longer does cable news control the debate. You know, the revolution's here, and it's not going to be televised.
Question from Periscope. What will be your first official act when you're elected president?
I would take day one to undo about 10,000 executive orders that have come from previous presidents that have added burdens to the economy, making it harder for us to keep and maintain American business and jobs.
Tom from Periscope wants to know, can I have a job if you become president?
It's illegal, Tom, all right? I can't do that. But if you work for liberty lovers in the free market, because we're going to make government so small you can barely see it, but that means there's going to be a plethora of jobs in the private economy.
How would you replace our current failed healthcare system?
You know, I've practiced medicine for 20 years. Most of my adult life was learning how to do eye surgery and then practicing eye surgery and ophthalmology. And what I found as I practiced medicine is that there are some things that work and some things that don't work. The main complaint I got from patients was that their health insurance cost too much. And so there wasn't a good marketplace. There wasn't good competition. But the interesting thing is there were a couple things I did that insurance didn't cover. LASIK surgery, the surgery to get rid of glasses, insurance typically doesn't cover it. And contact lens, insurance doesn't cover either of these procedures or things that we dispense. And interestingly, the price went down every year for 15 years. So the marketplace does work when you get the patient to interact with the price and the doctor and the patient to know that they both care about the price. The old system, unfortunately, neither party cared about the price, and prices went up dramatically. The other thing about healthcare to remember is even before Obamacare, about half of healthcare was given and distributed by the government. So the bottom line is we have to realize is that what economic system distributes the most amount of goods to the most amount of people for the least amount of price. And that's capitalism. So we should apply capitalism also to healthcare, because what it would do is what it does to every other industry. It produces the most amount of goods at the cheapest amount of price.
Another question from Twitter. That one is kind of an open-ended one, but a good one. Is there any topic that's important to you that hasn't come up in previous debates?
You know, I think one of the things that is important to me is just the general concept of how government is inversely proportional to liberty. And I'll often say that there are two arguments for why we should have small government. One argument is the liberty argument. This is what Thomas Paine put forward when he said that government is a necessary evil. What he meant by that is you have to give up a certain amount of your liberty to have government. It's not an argument for no government, but what it is an argument for keeping government small because you have to give up some of your liberty to pay for government. So if we taxed you 100%, well, you basically would have given up all your liberty to use the fruits of your labor. If we tax you 50%, you're giving up half of your liberty. So really, we should all want to give up the minimal amount and keep government small. The other argument that I think is a great argument for small government is, or for a limited government, is the efficiency argument. Milton Friedman put this forward when he said, nobody spends somebody else's money as wisely as their own. So this is a good argument for not giving money to government because it's not their money. They don't have the wisdom or that feeling you get in the gut about spending money that you know you had to work hard to earn. So I think these arguments combined really are strong arguments for why we should have limited government. But to have limited government, you have to realize that that means you also have to watch military expenditures as well, because you cannot be conservative if you're liberal with military spending. Maybe one or two more.
Here's a question from Periscope. Are you worried President Obama will do something extreme before he leaves office?
What hasn't he done that's been extreme, I guess would be my first response to that. You know, the recent episode with, once again, him trying to do things without legislative action, it's not so much that that is extreme, although it is, but what's really extreme is the precedent of setting that the president can do things without congressional authority. What if the next president decided to do something like ban newspapers? People say, well, that's absurd. President Obama's not going to do that. I'm not saying President Obama will. What I'm saying is the precedent of him trying to create law without Congress actually passing the law, that precedent sets the precedent for the next president to take more power and the next president to take more power. That's what's been going on for 100 years. It's a very dangerous precedent and something we have to reverse, and one of the reasons I'm running for president.
But Twitter questions is kind of a follow-up, which is nice. It's a little interactive here, like on the debate stage. You said earlier you can't be banned from the internet just a few minutes ago. Clearly you haven't heard Donald Trump's plan to shut down parts of the internet, so comment on that.
You know, isn't it funny that your first response to things that Donald Trump is to laugh, and then your second response is to be sad that anybody would treat a candidate like that seriously? He so flippantly says things like, well, we'll just close down a little bit of that internet thing. And when you think about that, you think, my goodness, is he talking about closing down the right to express yourself? That's what the internet is. It's no different than closing a newspaper down. Would anybody say that we could close a newspaper down, abrogate the First Amendment, and that would somehow be acceptable in our society? So no, I'm alarmed that where we are with having a celebrity entertainer up there, but who actually posits and proposes things that are or should be an anathema to everything America stands for.
How will you build our military?
I think what we'll do to make ourselves stronger is we have to have a more focused understanding of what we should be doing to defend ourselves. We do have to have a strong military, but we have to put it in perspective. Right now we spend about $600 billion on the military. If you put that in perspective, it's about equal to the next 10 countries combined. So we spend as much in our military as Russia and China, plus 8 more countries combined. And so I think that it's something that if you want a strong military, first thing you have to do is know what your purpose is, and you have to know that what we need to be doing is not building nations around the world, not intervening in everyone's civil war, but having a national defense that's strong enough to repel and strong enough to deter all attacks.
We're going to do a couple more. We just got the news from Twitter that Rand Rally is now trending on Twitter as one of the highest followed hashtags on the entire system right now. So we're gonna keep going for just a little
That's
bit. I know it's
great.
getting late.
So
23,000 tweets?
hashtag Rand Rally is trending on Twitter.
It is.
And
And
we
I have
think that maybe people ought to turn off their TV more.
I have a related question to that. It's trending on Twitter, and it was also Rand Paul, your Twitter handle, was number 2 in Twitter follower growth so far during this debate, and you're not even on stage. The comment here is, guess the boycott is working. Want to comment on that?
I'm thinking maybe we should just tell them in advance we won't show up for any more of their stupid debates, but probably shouldn't pre-announce that. But the thing is that I think that we live in a world where young people are not being counted in presidential polls. We live in a world where a lot of people are getting their news on the internet, from their phone, from their friends, but they're not watching traditional news shows. Most of the young people I know, high school, college age kids that are friends of our family, they're not turning on the television to get their news, and thank goodness that means that we're taking power away from those who think they can manipulate the political process to keep people like me off the stage. And so if there's a lesson here, hopefully it's to the media elites that we're not going to take it lying down. We're going to take our message straight to the people.
Here's a question from Periscope. Who scares you the most on that stage and why?
Where do I get started? I think the worst thing is that I don't think there is another reasonable voice for foreign policy on the stage. What we need is somebody who believes, as Reagan did, in peace through strength, but someone who's not eager to carpet bomb the Middle East, make the sand glow, and who also understands that terrorists are very weak people. They want to create fear because they cannot defeat you in any military battle. That we do not have to fear terrorists. And if we let our fear get the better of ourselves, if we forget who we are as Americans, if we let the Bill of Rights slip away from us because of fear of terrorism, that's a great loss. And I don't think anybody else on the stage truly understands that. I don't think anybody else on the stage truly understands and believes that or acknowledges that we could bankrupt the country in the near future and destroy the currency, not just because it's Democrats' fault, not because it's just President Obama's fault, but because it's both parties' fault. And that's really the rub. And you wonder why I've been excluded. Maybe I've been excluded because, you know what, they're afraid that I'm going to lift the veil that lets you know that, you know what, sometimes there's no difference between the parties. Sometimes both parties stand for the same thing. And that's why when you get an unusual candidate like myself who is willing to criticize both parties and acknowledge that both parties are bankrupting this country, maybe that just scares them too much that they don't want to hear it.
I have a follow-up question to some about the debate. Is it too late to swap out John Kasich or Jeb Bush for Rand Paul?
You know, I think that really there's not much new being said on the stage, and what we need to do is people need to go look for their information elsewhere. We need to not be confined by certain news sources. We need to not be confined by looking in one place. And also, we need to send a message to the news media that, guess what? These polls that are going on are not going to define the election. We're not going to let the news media control what is covered based on the polls. You know, we have whole networks that have gone gaga over a celebrity TV star, and as a consequence, we're not having a real substantive debate. But the only way we can make a difference is that those of us who are causing this to trend on Twitter tonight, if you'll actually register to vote. If you're not in Iowa, you're not in New Hampshire, make phone calls for us. If you have $5, send us $5. If everybody online that's trending right now would and get involved, we could make a huge difference. If you'll go to randpaul.com, you can find out where I'm going to be in New Hampshire for the next couple of days. If you go to randpaul.com, you can find out where I'll be in Iowa. If you go to randpaul.com and you've got some money rubbing a hole in your pocket, you want to help us out, you can give to us at randpaul.com.
Justin Amash has a message for you. He says, thank you, Rand Paul, for standing up for all Americans. I'm proud to stand with Rand in defense of liberty and the Constitution. Hashtag Rand Rally.
Well, thank you, Justin Amash. He's one of our heroes. He's from Western Michigan and one of the most liberty-loving of those in Congress. He's been a great help to both me and my father, and we're proud of Justin Amash. And if you ever want to know where he stands, he's got every vote up online telling you exactly what he believes.
I have a question from Rand students. Rand Paul, what will you do to limit NSA spying?
That's a great question. I think we ought to obey the Constitution. We can defend ourselves. We can look for information from those we have suspicion, probable cause, an individual's name. So what I've been saying is, look, we can get more records from people for whom we suspect of being terrorists, but we shouldn't be getting records of all Americans. And so I think the NSA ought to be doing surveillance of foreigners and not Americans. And when there's anything that involves us domestically, they ought to involve the Fourth Amendment. The NSA is out of control, and when the National Intelligence Director comes before the Senate and lies to the Senate, maybe we need to put him in jail and teach him a lesson and say, you know what, it's perjury to come before Congress and lie to Congress. This is unacceptable, and no one should have that much power over the individual citizenry if they're going to come to Congress and lie to us. I think my voice is about to run out. We're getting very close, and
I think what we'll do now is we're about to end here, but before we do that, since Rand is doing this rather than doing the debate, how about a closing statement from Rand Paul, what everybody should know and take away from tonight?
there'll be no buzzers, no lights, no limits.
You can talk as long as you'd like right now.
You know, I can talk for a long time. No, my voice is wearing out, so I won't keep you too long tonight. But I want to thank everybody who's been helping across the country. I want to thank all the liberty-loving folks who have come into the Republican Party, who came in either first with my dad's campaign or have come in with our campaign, and to let you know you are making a difference. They're worried about you in Washington. They fear you, but they will only truly fear you and they will only truly listen to you when you show up to vote. And so until we start making inroads in votes, they'll manipulate polls to manipulate us out of debates, to manipulate us out of the news, but we will not truly have power till we have the votes, until we can win elections. I won my election for the U.S. Senate against all odds. The establishment picked the other guy. All of the resources of Washington, all of the PAC money, all of the special interest went to the establishment guy, and we beat him. It was an uphill climb. It was a great upset. We can do it again. I'm the first to admit to you it's a long shot. They've beaten us down with the news coverage. They've excluded us from the debates, but they can't keep us off the internet, and they can't keep me from spreading the ideas of liberty. And what my hope is, as you move forward out of this tonight, you go on randpaul.com and you say to the establishment, you know what, we're turning off our TV, we're tuning into the internet, and we're going to follow the campaign, support the campaign, and spread the word to all our friends. Thanks, everybody. Good night.